Again, welcome. It is so good to be able to worship the Lord Jesus with you guys this morning. For those of you online, you should be able to see a QR code on the screen. If you click the QR code, you should get the worship guide to be able to follow along in worship this morning as well. This morning, we begin a 3-week series on gratitude. You were about to enter into this season of Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we enter into a time where we should be able to pause and be able to reflect on all that we have been blessed with, and our hearts should be filled with gratitude. But let's be honest, these last few years have been a time where gratitude has been hard. We've become a society that's become bitter, selfish, self-centered, mean, and if we're honest, straight up rude. There's a lot that has happened over the last 2 years that have affected us on a global level, a national level. Things that have affected us in our families, in our relationships, in our work. Challenges that we have experienced even as a church family. How do you have gratitude when there's been so much loss? How do you give thanks when all around there is still pain and hurt and loss and disappointment and sadness? And to see what God says about this morning, we turn our attention to the story of a life of a man by the name of Job. So if you have your Bibles, we'll be in Job 1 and 2. I'm going to summarize the text, so you guys can have your Bibles open there. But I want to just give you some thoughts from Job's life through these first 2 chapters, and then look at some other passages in the book of Job of how to have gratitude in the midst of loss and pain. And if you are not familiar with this story, let me just quickly share what the story of Job is. Job 1 begins with 5 verses about who Job is and what he's like. And the author presents him as a righteous and a blessed man. And he has 5 different things that he says about him. One, his name is Job. He lives in the land of Uz, which is probably somewhere northeast of the Sea of Galilee, since that area would support his livestock needs. But he's not an Israelite. He's not from the people of the nation of Israel. The second thing he says is he's a righteous man. Job 1:1 says he's a righteous man. His godliness is described as blameless and upright, one who feared God and who turned away from evil. And although he's not from Israel, he worships the one true and living God. He's not perfect because you see that in a few verses that he's offering sacrifices. There's no need to offer sacrifices if you don't have sins or if you don't have flaws. But the Bible describes this man as a man of righteousness. The third thing you notice in Job 1 is he's a wealthy man. And you see the scope of his wealth. The scriptures doesn't hide how wealthy he is. He's got 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 female donkeys and very many servants. The summary would be that he was the greatest of all the people of the East in verse 3. You also see he has a happy home. Like all of his kids actually like each other. They're hanging out together. They're fellowshipping together. They regularly get to each other's house for parties and feasting. They like each other. Then you notice he's diligent. Job sees his role as the father of the home, and he offers sacrifices for his children after feast days, after those days of them celebrating, just in case they might have said something that dishonored God. And so Job did this continually, verse 5 says. So this is Job. He's a wealthy man. He's a happy man. He's a righteous man. He's a blessed man. And so in order to understand this guy, you got to realize that you, as readers of this text, we have the whole story. We know what's really happening. We see the plot beyond the plot, the backstory. You are introduced to the plot in verse 6 of the text. And the text indicates there's a day when all of the heavenly beings came to present themselves to the Lord, and in that gathering, Satan was there. And the writer wants us to picture a heavenly court, a gathering, a get-together where Jesus or Yahweh is seated as supreme. And the Lord sees Satan, and he engages Satan in this conversation. And he says to Satan, where did you come from? And Satan responds, he says, from roaming the earth and walking around on it. And so far, so good. But then God does something very interesting. God turns the spotlight onto Job and says, hey, you see my guy? You see Job over there? He's a man of integrity. He's a man who fears me and turns away from evil. I mean, and if you think about it, that's interesting to say. It's like you've got a jewelry store and you're getting robbed, and you're the clerk behind it, and he goes, hey, by the way, that piece of diamond over there, that's actually the most valuable thing here, right? Why don't you go pay attention to that thing? Like God says, hey, go pay attention to this guy, to the devil, right? Like God is saying, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but I got someone that's actually pretty good. And Satan's response is pretty telling. He says, hey, you know what? The only reason that Job fears you is because of self-interest. The only reason that he's worshiping you is because of what he can get out of it. Because of all the ways that you have blessed him. Right? Take away the blessings, and everything will collapse. You stop blessing Job, you watch him. He will walk away from you so fast. You stop providing for him. You stop giving him everything that he needs. He will reject you. He'll turn away from you. And Satan says, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you stretch out your hand? Why don't you strike everything he owns? And then he will curse you to your face. And there's some important things for us to note here, there. Number one, from the beginning, we see that nothing in Job's life is accidental. That God is behind it, while not morally culpable for it. There is a divine intentionality behind the events of Job's life. It is God who turns the spotlight on Job. And Satan describes the difficulties as your hand, and you strike down everything he owns. And Satan's primary accusation is against God and Job. Basically saying, hey, God, are you so good that you can be loved just for who you are, not for what you do? Are you so good that people will love you for you and not the gifts that you give? Can a man hold on to God if there's no benefits attached? Will they still worship you if their family's taken away? If their income is gone? Do you think they'll worship you at that point? Or do you think they only worship you because of what you give them? And here's the third thing I want you to notice. Cursing God is what Satan wants and what Job feared for his children. And you'll see this develop even further as we look through the book of Job. But for now, just note the battle line is drawn between blessing and cursing. Cursing God is what Satan wants. Cursing God is what Job feared. And the result of this heavenly conversation is that Satan is now given permission to bring disaster upon Job. But God gives him one warning. He says, you can't touch his body. And notice here that is Satan who is doing the evil, not God. He's allowed it. God's allowed it. God's permitted it. God's sanctioned it. God's even ordained it. But Satan is the one who's doing it. And you get down in chapter 1, 4 disasters are listed. And they strike at everything that Job has. The Sabaeans come and steal the oxen and the donkeys, killing all the servants. Fire falls from heaven, killing all the sheep and the servants. The Chaldeans steal the cattle, killing all the servants. And then the most tragic of all comes next. The children were all together in one home, gathering, fellowshipping, and the building collapses and they all die. I want you to notice Job's response. It's worship that's full of grief. It's grieving worship. And friends, that may be a new category for some of us. Verse 20 says, he tore his robe, he shaved his head, he fell on the ground, and he worshiped God. These are all the actions of deep grief. And in his grief, Job doesn't do the thing that Satan wants him to do. He doesn't, in that moment, curse God. Rather, in that moment, he still worships God. And here's what he says in verse 21. He says, naked I came from the earth, naked I shall return. The Lord gives, the Lord takes, Blessed be the name of the Lord. He blessed God. He didn't curse God. He chose, even in those moments of pain and hardship, to bless. He chose not to charge God foolishly and to accuse God of things. And so Job passes the first test. And now, as we watch this script, it goes back into heaven. And God and Satan are back together again, and they engage in this repeat conversation. And the context is in chapter 2, verse 1, and God questions and basically says, hey, look at Job again. You afflicted him. You made him suffer, and he still worshiped me. And Satan's response is still the same. And the spotlight on Job is nearly identical, except that God adds, man, you did all of this, and he still has integrity. You tried to destroy him for no reason, but he still worships me. And now Satan ups the ante, right? He argues, hey, yeah, you might have taken stuff away, but make him suffer. Make him experience pain. Make him go through hardships. Make him really suffer. And he argues that Job's trials are still not good enough for him to curse God. So he says, make his body suffer. So he says, stretch out your hand, strike his flesh and his bones, and then Job will surely curse you to your face. And again, God grants him permission that Satan can do anything he wants to Job, but he cannot kill him. And now the suffering takes on a whole new level. Satan leaves God's presence and infected Job with terrible boils from the sole of his feet to the top of his head. That's what we see in chapter 2. But as you read through the book of Job, you discover bits and pieces of this, of how bad this is. We have no idea what kind of illness suffered, but if you read through the book, you discover that it was really, really bad. And Job retreats to the ash heap, which is likely the place where garbage was collected in that society. And he may have been quarantining himself from all the rest of the people because he didn't know if this is infectious and others could be affected, or it could have been just a deep expression of grief. But this was the place where outcasts lived. This was the place where no one came. And what came next must have been a devastating blow to this man. The love of his life, the mother of his children, his lifelong companion, comes to him and says, why are you still being a man of integrity? Curse God and die. It's not a suggestion, it's an imperative. It just says, do this. You've suffered enough. God doesn't love you. God doesn't care about you. Reject God, curse God, deny God, and die. Her words must have cut really deep. Instead of seeing Job's integrity as his greatest asset, she curses it as a failure to live in the real world. Job is suffering, and here she is commanding him, hey, just shorten your misery. Just give up. Their suffering and misery was too much for her to bear. But she fails to realize that her emotional, short-sighted, panic words reflected exactly what Satan wanted. And she echoes Satan's accusation to God in heaven that, hey, suffer and watch him just curse you and reject you. You see Job's wife actually falling into the exactly what Satan wants there. And once again, we see Job's amazing resilience and righteousness. He responds with a measured rebuke, suggesting, hey, why are you being so foolish? And Job refuses to find a false way to escape from his suffering and expresses his unwavering allegiance to God. And here we see the major difference between them. She wanted relief over a pursuit of God regardless of what happened. Job's answer posed in the question is critically important for us to consider. Job responds to his wife and says, shall we only receive good from God? Shall we not receive evil? Two words for us to understand. First, evil doesn't necessarily mean sinful. Rather, it means something bad, disastrous, painful. Secondly, the word receive means an active, passive participation in that what God decrees, not just passive reception. It means that you see something as good or blessed by God and put that together and hear what he says. He says, we must be thankful for the good that comes from God, and we must be thankful for the things that are hard. We are to humbly receive both, to see the bounty and the bruising are consecrated and ordained by God. Both bounty and bruising are blessed when you bless the name of the one who is behind him. And the final summary leaves us amazed and convicted. Job 2, verse 9, here's what the author says about Job. It says, throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. And friends, this is the same way the enemy still works, right? I mean, we often see like, hey, let's make us suffer in the physical realm. Let's take away our possessions, our things in our lives. And then what we often see is people saying, you know what, God doesn't love me. God doesn't care for me. Let me curse God and move on. Let me live life without Jesus. Or it's, hey, let's make that person suffer. Let's use sickness or cancer or some mental or emotional thing to say, man, if God really loved me, then this shouldn't happen in my life. So why should I pursue God? Why should I love God? Satan's tactics haven't changed even here in 2021. He still works this way. And we need to be mindful of that. And we need to pay attention to that. Because when our trials and our obstacles in our lives cause us to say, does God really care? Oftentimes that's the enemy working to pull us away from Jesus. And in those moments, we should look at someone like Job and say, God, instead of pulling away, I'm going to push in even deeper. I'm going to push in even closer to you. And I don't have time to go deeper into all of the passages, so let me just give you an overview of the book of Job to see some of Job's responses in the midst of pain, suffering, and loss. Notice first his God-honoring lament. When we lament, we are proving our determination to turn toward God and trust Him with our hurt instead of turning away from God. We are praying in those moments as an act of faith. We are worshiping as an act of faith. And here's what Job 1:20 says, that Job stood up, tore his robe, shaved his head, he fell to the ground, and he worshiped God. He never ignored the issue. He never avoided the issue. He lamented and he grieved. And lamenting isn't a quick fix to this problem. It's meant to lead us before the Lord in an honest and real way that also honors Him. Job doesn't, in the midst of pain, pretend that everything is okay. But we also see a man full of heart of gratitude and praise. Job 1:21, here's what it says. It says, naked I came from my mother's womb. Naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives, the Lord takes. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Even in the midst of pain, he says, blessed be your name. A full heart of gratitude. God, everything I have is from you. And the things that you take away, I trust that you have a bigger purpose behind it. But I want you to also notice here, Job trusts God even in the midst of difficulties. He trusts God even in the midst of hard seasons. In chapter 2, verse 10, here's what it says. This is Job speaking to his wife. He says, should I only accept good from God and not adversity? Should I only accept all of the blessings from God and not think that God shouldn't let me go through some struggles and pain and hardship? In other passages, we see Job's honesty and transparency with God as he expresses anguish. Listen to these words in Job 3:24-26. He says, I sigh when food is before me, and my groans pour out like water. For the thing I feared has overtaken me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I can't relax, or I can't be calm. I have no rest, for turmoil has come. Even in the midst of that, Job knew that he could express anguish to God. Something else that you see in the life of Job. Job understood that gratitude in the midst of loss and pain meant that God was a safe place to go to. He was safe enough that Job could actually ask God questions. Here's a piece of the conversation with Job that Job has with God in Job 7:19-20. He says, will you ever look away from me? Will you leave me alone long enough to just so I could swallow? If I have sinned, what have I done to you? Watcher of humanity, why have you made me your target so that I have become a burden to you? He knew that God was big enough, strong enough, able enough that he could go to God with any question that he had, and God could handle it. So I think a lot of us think that we should just have faith. We should not question. But you don't see that in the life of Job. You see a man who, in the midst of pain and hardships, pushed into God and said, hey, God, what's going on here? Why is this happening to me? Right? And I think that's healthy. I think that's good for some of us, because some of us presume that if we have enough faith, everything will turn out okay. And we put the burden on us and our faith. And we say, I just got to have enough faith and everything was going to be all right. But it's okay to go to God and say, God, I'm doubting here. I'm struggling here. It's the story of the New Testament is like, oh, Jesus, I believe, but help my unbelief. Right? I think you can change this situation, but in my mind, I'm struggling right now because of what I see. Help my unbelief. Here's the other thing you see about Job. He grieved, he questioned, but in all of that, he grieved without sin. Job 1:22, I read this verse earlier. Throughout all of this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. Here's the last thing I want you to notice through the book of Job, that in the midst of all of the pain, in the midst of all of the brokenness, Job never lost hope. In fact, Job's hope was an eternal hope. This is one of my favorite passages in the entire book of Job. It's found in Job 19:25. He says, I know my Redeemer lives, and that at the end he will stand on the dust, even after my skin has been destroyed. Yet I will see God in my flesh. I will see him myself. My eyes will look at him and not be as a stranger. My heart longs within me. Here's a man that's lost everything. In the midst of that, it says, my hope is that one day I will see you. That my hope is that I know that you are alive and that you are working, and I trust you in the midst of that. See, Job was able to have this heart of gratitude and heart of worship in the middle of loss and pain, because his suffering and pain included God-honoring lament. A heart of gratitude and worship and praise. I trust in the midst of difficulties, the ability to express anguish and hurt, the freedom to question what God was up to grieve without sinning, and a hope that was eternal. Friends, for us to be able to have gratitude in the midst of pain and loss, we've got to be able to see the bigger picture. We've got to be able to see, and we've got to be able to have the right heart as we come to that. Otherwise, it's very easy for us to turn bitter and to do exactly what Satan wants to say. You know what, God, I don't need you. I don't want you. I'm just going to do this on my own. This is a waste of time. Let me pause here. Let me bring this home to us as a community and as a church. Because I think for us in leadership in the midst of hard seasons, it's easy for us to begin to paint pictures in a positive picture and to communicate, hey, we're moving forward. We've done that. Over the last several months, we've often communicated things like, we're relaunching as a church. That God is up to something here at Loft City. And I don't doubt any of that to be true. I believe that God is doing something new for us in this season. I am grateful that in a year of 2020, when 10,000 churches shut down, we're still here. That God has sustained us. But I also need to acknowledge the fact that this last 20 months have been painful. It's been a hard year. When we left this building on March 8, 2020, this place was so full that we were bringing chairs in from the other rooms because there was no space. There were conversations that were going on behind the scenes of, hey, we need to look at getting a new building. And over the course of the last 20 months, there has been a lot of loss. There's been a lot of pain. And I want to acknowledge that's been hard. We've seen many in our community move to other cities. We've seen those who are part of our community struggle with their faith and walk away from church. That's been hard as a pastor. We've sent folks to plant another church in our city, and what should have been a celebration, if I'm honest and transparent, it felt more like a church split. We're different from where we were in 2020. The loss has been hard. A church like ours has different opinions on everything from things like race and reconciliation and politics and pandemic and social distancing and masking. And while it was easy to celebrate the kind of diversity that we had in March of 2020, this season has shown us how difficult it is to stay united in the midst of such diversity. It's hard. And the honest reality is, friends, that there isn't a lot of multi-ethnic churches, not because there isn't a desire to see multi-ethnic churches. I haven't heard a lot of people say, oh, I just want to be in a white church or a black church, or that I don't care about anyone else, right? The truth is, there isn't a lot of multi-ethnic churches because this kind of ministry is hard ministry. It's often you're misunderstood, and it's not because you don't love Jesus or pursue Jesus. It's your culture, your upbringing, or your perspective on your experiences that we don't have shared experiences. There's several of you in this room that have joined the church in the midst of the pandemic, and I'm humbled that you became a part of this church, even though you haven't seen how well we've displayed God's love for the world. A community that pre-pandemic that we would, literally 2 years ago, I had to make 20 keys and just give it out because no one wanted to leave this building. They just loved to hang around, and I got tired of waiting for them to leave. And now it's like, man, are they coming back? Will they come back? A community that pre-pandemic where I could boast to fellow pastors that, man, I have 80% of my church volunteer in some sort of ministry or another. And then we saw a year where a handful of folks did all the heavy lifting. And it's been hard to get folks motivated to use the gifts and talents that God has given them to serve the church body. I'll admit that the lack of potlucks, I miss all the food that we used to eat together. The time that we shared over a table at the end of service where we would communicate and just love and realize that I'm not simply a Republican or a Democrat. I'm not just simply an Indian or a white guy or a black guy. I am an image bearer of Jesus. And you're an image bearer of Jesus. Even simple things like holding hands together at the end of the service, right? That it's a very simple thing. And I know it made some of you feel weird, and maybe in this season, you're grateful that we don't have to do that. But that's just the simple things of just saying, hey, I'm holding hands with a brother, a sister. They look different. They're from a different socioeconomic class. They're from a different culture or a different worldview. They've got different political views. But when we hold hands, we are communicating. We are brother and sister. And what unites us is Jesus. Simple things like that have caused us to be different. I'll acknowledge that it's been a hard season to pastor when I don't even see many of you on a consistent basis. I don't like pastoring people I can't see, right? This is why God has wired me to pastor a small church, because I want to know your names. I want to know your stories. I want to know when you're struggling. I don't want to be a place where, oh, there's a bunch of people in here and I don't know who they are. And yet, for many, I have not seen in so long. We know you're watching. We know you're safe. But if I'm honest, it hasn't been easy to pastor that. There's been a lot of loss. It hasn't been easy. And it's easy for us to simply say, hey, we're moving forward. We're pushing ahead. But there's got to be times when we pause and say, this is hard. This is difficult. And I know that's been me. But many of you, you've lost friends that have gone to other churches or moved to other cities. You haven't been able to serve the way you've served. And it feels like coming back into this building is different from what it felt like in March of 2020. Let's sit there. Let's acknowledge that. Let's recognize that. But in the midst of that, I want to acknowledge that we are called to have the exact same response that Job had in the midst of pain and loss. That we're called to be a community that doesn't ignore the loss, doesn't pretend that it never happened, But in the midst of that, we have a God-honoring lament. A heart that's full of gratitude and worship, that God says, hey, God, you still have given me breath, you have given me purpose, and I'm grateful for that. A trust that in the midst of difficulties that says, hey, God, I don't know what you're up to, but I'm trusting that you're doing something here. The freedom to be able to express anguish and hurt. The freedom to be able to ask God, God, what are you up to right now? What are you asking of me? What are you calling me to do? But also the conviction to say in the midst of that, God, I'm going to grieve, but I'm not going to sin against you. I'm not going to sin toward others. I'm not going to become selfish and just want my own agendas and my own purposes. And to have a hope that says, hey, we're not just a gathering of folks who just get together every Sunday morning just to sing a few songs and hear a guy just go on and on and on and then leave. But the hope that what we're doing here, there's an eternal perspective. That we have an eternal hope. That what we do here is just a small reflection of what we're going to do in eternity. That when we worship Jesus today, we don't see him, but there'll come a day that we will sing to him and we will see our Savior face to face. That this should create, our gathering should create this eternal hope, this eternal longing, that there will be a day, as Job says, I know my Redeemer lives, that I will see him face to face. That we would have hope in the midst of that. And I am more convinced today than I am a year ago that while ministry has been hard, friends, this is what God has called us to do. He's called us that while we have differing opinions and thoughts, that God is honored when we stay in this fight and we say that, God, wherever you are leading us, whatever you are calling us to do, whatever this church may look like, we trust you, we'll follow you. It doesn't mean that this isn't hard, and it doesn't mean that loss isn't real, but God, we trust you. So I got to ask, what is it going to really take for us to really go all in with Jesus in the midst of loss? What's it going to take for us to go really all in? To go all in with Jesus in the midst of loss? See, learning to live on a God who is invisible means that you have determined the who is more important than the what you get. That you're not just worshiping because of what you get, but you're saying who I worship is more important than all of the other things that happen. It means that you, like Job, determine that you will take what should have destroyed your faith and instead use it as a platform to say, God, I should not be standing, but while I still have breath, I'm going to point my life toward you. I'm going to see others pointed toward you. It means that you have already answered and settled the question in your mind that God is so good that he can be loved for himself, not for any of the things that he gives us, not for his gifts. That you've made up your mind that God is worth pursuing, that God is worth giving your life for. You know, and that's hard in our culture. That's hard because we are a very materialistic, consumeristic culture. It's hard. I remember, I would think it was 2012, 2013, I had the opportunity to go to Kenya. And we were just launched, maybe a year into launch, and here I am as a pastor. I want to see this thing grow and explode, and struggling that there are days when lights don't work and projector don't work and live streams don't work. 10 years later, none of that has still changed. It's still our same struggle. And just going to that Kenya trip, just frustrated that things aren't going the way it wanted. And I would get to Kenya, and we were in with the Maasai community at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro. And one morning we were woken up and said, we're going to church. And so we get ready to go, and they drive us, and we end up underneath a tree. And the people gather under this tree. There's no sound system. There's no lighting. There's no pro presenter and OBS and Facebook or YouTube. They just sing and they worship and they are just the most joyful people in the world. And as I sat there, I was just reminded, like, man, God, why do I serve you? Why do I get irritated when things don't go well? And here's the folks that in the midst of having nothing, they're still joyful. They're still worshipful. They still have a heart that says, God, I might not have what the rest of the world has, but I got you, and that's all I need. See, when Jesus is all that you have, you quickly realize that Jesus is all you need. And for many of us, because we think we need more than Jesus, we haven't come to the conclusion that Jesus is enough. So let me end. I don't even have a watch today, so I actually think I'm shorter today than any other weeks, but let me end with just giving you 4 questions for us to ponder on. I want to do this by looking at Job 1:21 and chapter 2, verse 1. 4 questions that we've got to be able to ask and answer in order for us to be people of gratitude in the midst of loss. Number 1, it's the question of focus. Why am I here? Why am I here? Job 1:21, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. What is Job saying? He understood that what life is all about. He knew that life is not about the enjoyment of the gifts of life over the giver of life. He knew that the giver was more important than the gifts. He knew his place as created, and he knew God's place as the creator. There is no tone here of, God, my rights have been violated. There's no questions of like, God, you better answer me right now. There is no saying, God, you're not fair to me. Instead, there is this grief there. There's this deep, gut-wrenching grief that expresses itself in clothes that are torn, in head that is shaved. But yet in the midst of that, there is this worship that says, God, naked I came into the earth, naked I'll return. I will still bless you. I'll still worship you. I'll still trust you. See, the first rock of this altar is focus, a cultivated orientation of the heart that says, God, even if you slay me, yet I will praise you. That God, I'm not here for the things and the stuff and the family and the friends. I'm not here for the enjoyment and the happiness. As good and as wonderful as those things are, I'm here because you have fearfully and wonderfully made me. I'm here because you have given me breath and you have given me life. I'm here because you are faithful even when things are chaotic and even when things are hard. God, I'm here to worship you. One of the most meaningful songs for me in the last year, and it's an old song, but it's just those words. Here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you are my God. You are altogether lovely. You are altogether worthy. You are altogether wonderful to me. So the first thing we got to have to be people of gratitude in the midst of loss is a heart that understands why you're here. Second thing is you've got to have proper theology. What's my view of God? Again, chapter 1, verse 21, the Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Job has this robust understanding of the sovereignty of God in all of events, that there is not a thing on this earth that could happen without God knowing it and allowing it. Right? It's the verse in the New Testament, not a hair on my head will fall without God knowing it. But friends, do we believe that? Do we trust that? The text indicates that there was nothing that happened in Job's life without God knowing it. God was in control of everything, even when Job didn't know that. Gratitude in the midst of loss flows from a heart that says, I know that you are good, I know that you are sovereign, and I know that my life is in your hands. No power of hell, no scheme can ever pluck me from his hands. We sing it. Do we believe it? Do we actually believe that? There's nothing that the devil could do. That if you're a follower of Jesus, you're safe. He's got you. Right, and third thing is affections. What do I really love? What do I really love? Again, chapter 1, verse 21, blessed be the name of the Lord. Right? Here's what pain and suffering does for us. Pain and suffering often exposes to us the things that we really love. Right? It shows us, oh, I think I can't survive without this. He's lost his sheep. He's lost his servants. He's lost his children. He's lost his health. And Job says, blessed be the name of the Lord. He chose to bless in the midst of loss and everything that he has. His love for God was not conditional on the gifts that God has given. Job loved the Lord in blessing. He loved the Lord in bruising. He loved the Lord in luxury, and he loved the Lord in loss. I tremble at those two words, luxury and loss. Both of them have been means of spiraling affections for God. Luxury and loss both test our desire for self-sufficiency. One by thinking, I did this all by myself. Right? Luxury. Look at what I've done. And loss that looks at God and says, how dare you do this to me? And so when it comes to pain and suffering, the question is the same. When God brings you to the end of yourself, in those moments, will you feel love or rage? So affection. What do I really love? And the last thing is trust. What will I rely on? Job 2:1. Should we receive good from God and not receive evil? The point is, God knows what we need. And so I can trust him. God knows that if I needed that job, he would have made sure I kept that job. But maybe he's allowed that door to close because he's got something else in mind. God knows what I need. That good and hardship are gifts. But to believe that and to live that, friends, we have to make the choice to trust. That we might have to say, God, I don't know the reason, I don't know the point, I don't know the purpose. But if you sent Jesus to die for my sin and took care of the biggest problem, then I can trust you with my daily problems. That I could trust you for today. That you can always cling to the who question. See, for many of us, this is where the real battle lies. And this is why gratitude is hard. Because it's a question of trust. You will never see your pain turn to a platform of gratitude unless you're willing to trust. Focus. Why am I here? Theology. What do I believe about God? Affections. What do I really love? Trust. What do I rely on? These are the foundations for us to be able to be full of gratitude in the midst of pain and loss. It means that we, like Job, learn to declare, blessed be your name. Friends, we're about to come to the communion table. When you walked in this morning, you should have received elements. If you haven't, there's some in the back. But if you're a follower of Jesus, we know that even in our suffering, we are joined in it by Jesus. And we can look at his suffering and his death on the cross as necessary. Because without his actions, there'd be no resurrection. And we would not be partakers of what he gave, his body and his blood. The table is the means by which God sustains us, by which God strengthens us, and turns a bunch of I's into we's. That is not just about me, it's about us. In a sense, the table is the church. The church is the body of Christ, and we are grafted into his life and into one another's life. Because when we celebrate this table together, we're saying we're part of one family, the family of God. And this is why it's fitting that we refer to the table as Holy Communion. It's been set apart made holy, that we have been set apart and made holy from not only the fallenness of this world, but from our fallen nature, that we are made holy by the source of holiness and communing in every sense of the word with him and with each other, we become more like Jesus. But friends, as beautiful and powerful as communion is, as much as we joyfully celebrate and participate in it, the loss that we have experienced allows us to bear in mind the suffering that necessitated what allows us to come to the table. Jesus knows our pain. Jesus knows our grief. And one of the words that has ministered to me the most over this past year, 3 words. Jesus, you know. Jesus, you know. You know what it's like to be hurt. You know what it's like to feel lost. You know what it's like to experience betrayal. You know. Jesus, you know. Man, I'll joke with you. Jesus, you know what it's like to have people fall asleep on you in the middle of a sermon, right? Jesus, you know. I mean, there's not a thing that our Savior doesn't know. So when we come to the table, we don't just come to a God who's just out there. But whatever pain and loss and hardship you've experienced and you come to this room with, you can say, Jesus, you know. You know. Those words have been so etched in my heart that I've got it plastered on my wall in my office. That I look in those moments when it's a hard email or a challenging call or disappointment or failure, I just look at that and remind myself, he knows. He knows. Friends, no matter what you're going through today, he knows. He knows what it's like. This is why I love communion, because communion is a reminder that we don't have to do this by ourselves. We don't have to go through life without someone who doesn't understand or doesn't experience or doesn't feel. But communion is our daily, weekly reminder that we come to one who knows where we are, and he loves us, and he cares for us. So I want to invite you as we sing. You have the elements. Would you spend some time with Jesus? Would you bring your loss to him? Would you bring your pain to him? And would you say, God, this might not make sense for me right now, but I am choosing to trust you. I'm choosing to say that, God, I believe that you have my life in your hands, that you're in control. And so would you just spend some time, whenever you're ready, take communion, and whenever you feel ready, feel free to stand and worship with the worship team as well. Let's worship him.